Been a key outpost ever since. Indeed, during the Second World War, it was vital as the gateway to the Mediterranean. The Gibraltarians are resolutely British. Indeed, they voted in two referendums, one in 1967 and one in 2002, by a massive majority of 99% to remain British. And I believe that we, as UKIP, should reciprocate that loyalty at a time when Gibraltar is facing Spanish aggression. Gibraltar joined the EEC with Britain in 1972. As a result, it forms part of the South West constituency. Indeed, UKIP has two MEPs who represent Gibraltar. However, UKIP's performance in Gibraltar has been poor. Our vote in European elections in the past has been derisory. We have neglected Gibraltar, and it is time, I believe, to right that wrong. I believe the time has come to forge closer ties with our Gibraltarian cousins, and I can announce today that UKIP will be registering as a political party in Gibraltar and will be standing in parliamentary elections from now on in. Let us also offer Gibraltar the opportunity to send an MP to Westminster. This has two clear benefits. One, it will forge closer ties between ourselves and Gibraltar, and secondly, and more importantly, it will put Spanish claims to Gibraltar to bed once and for all. But I personally wouldn't stop there. Why not offer the same opportunity to all of the British overseas territories? Let us give the loyal Falklanders their own MP in Parliament. And let's offer it too, referendums to the Crown dependencies, the Channel Islands. Let's give them all the opportunity to forge closer links with the UK and have representation in Westminster. The French can show us the way in this sphere. They have 27 seats set aside in their House of Representatives for MPs for overseas territories. Indeed, they even have an MP for London. I know. London, believe it or not, is the 5th largest city in France. Ladies and gentlemen, the opportunity to act on this is now. There are major constitutional changes afoot in this country over the next 10 years. An elected House of Lords is an inevitability. At the moment, the Lords as it stands, made up of political appointments, is not fit for purpose. The Scottish independence debate has highlighted the flaws in our system of devolution. It cannot be right, ladies and gentlemen, that the Scottish have their own parliament, that the Welsh have their own assembly, and that the Northern Irish have an assembly too, yet there is nothing for the English. The devolution genie is out of the bottle. It isn't going to be put back in. It's a mess at the moment. It's a constitutional nightmare. And what I believe is going to happen is we will be moving towards a more federal UK, which I believe will strengthen, not weaken, the Union. I envisage, and I sincerely hope, that Gibraltar will form part of that ever stronger union in the future. We, ladies and gentlemen, have to be the outriders on issues like this. We have to lead the political debate and not follow. The changes which are afoot over the next decade are going to be larger than anything in the past 100 years constitutionally. And I want UKIP to be at the forefront in support of a stronger union, a union with a parliament at Westminster dealing with non-devolved issues, yet assemblies and parliaments dealing with devolved issues. I think that makes sense. Ladies and gentlemen, we cannot go backwards. The only way is forwards, and to do so and to win, we must think out of the box. Now, I am going to introduce my guest here today. His name is Joe Caruana. Joe has travelled here from Gibraltar yesterday. Joe went into politics in 1967. He joined the Integration with Britain movement and stood for election in 1969. And he was appointed, when elected, to the Minister for Health Department. And later he became the Minister for Public Works. His party lost the election in 1972, and Joe spent 5 years in opposition in Gibraltar. He continues even to this day to campaign for representation in Westminster and is actively involved in lobbying and letter writing to further this cause. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Joe Caruana.
This says, keep Gibraltar British. It's my old war shield. I've been in politics now for over 40 years, so I'm getting them. My dear friends from the Southwest, friends of Gibraltar, we're very grateful to have been asked to address you because it means that you care for Gibraltar. And every British citizen should care for Gibraltar because Gibraltar is solid British. We got into trouble because the Queen came and visited us in 1954. And Franco didn't like it. The fascist guy, who's now dead, luckily, he didn't like the Queen coming over. So he started putting the screws on. And I happened to be in government at the time when he closed the frontier once and for all and robbed us of groceries, meat, even altar wine and oxygens for the hospitals. That's the kind of country Spain is like. And the present government are the heirs of the Franco policy, which we are suffering today. They want to see us strangled, our economy strangled. They can't stand seeing a small Gibraltar vibrant, dynamic, prosperous. They can't, because we are all of those things. So they have to screw us and intimidate us. And you know what they're using? They're using Europe as a tool, using all the regulations to try to trick Gibraltar in some way or another. You know, not long ago, the summer, in fact, in the summer, the queues were 5 hours and 7 hours long in the heat. Cars and pedestrians waiting there inhumanely, unheard of in the whole of Europe before the Berlin Wall. But there it was. They sent an elite force of the Guardia Civil, who are reminiscent of the Gestapo, because they put fear into you and anybody who tries to cross the border. If any of you have tried, you will see for yourselves. They stand there like that. They ask you to empty your pockets. They ask the ladies to open the handbags. Are you carrying tobacco? No, I don't smoke. Do you carry tobacco? No, I told you I don't smoke. What's in your pocket? And you have to empty your pocket. You know, this is the kind of behavior we're having to endure in this day and age because the Foreign Office is weak. It's the politicians are puppets of the Foreign Office. You know, there was a demarcation of the sea around Gibraltar. Gibraltar should have sea, you know, if it's a port, it should have sea. Well, the Spaniards said we don't have one, that we have a dry coast. Have you ever heard that? A dry coast? Well, we have one. We're unique. Because it said that the Treaty of Utrecht did not specify the handing over of the waters. I like to know why Admiral Rooke went with his navy, or did he fly in 1704? How stupid can you get? How can you create a myth like that? Well, they believe it, and they use it in all their official propaganda. And yet, when it came to demarcating the environmental areas of the seas around Gibraltar, where we're supposed to have 3 miles in one direction, 3 miles in another, and then the meridian, the SCO allowed the demarcation, the latitudes and longitudes or whatever they do, to the Gibraltar waters to come under Spanish control for the environment. And that's creating a hell of a problem today, because as I speak now, there's bound to be a Spanish Navy frigate just cruising along gaily in Gibraltar, British Gibraltar waters. And the Navy goes behind it with a megaphone saying, "You're in British territorial waters." And the Spaniards makes a nasty and improper hand signal, which is not stop. So, a survey vessel sent by Spain to survey the area around Gibraltar because we had created a reef for the fishery, spent 21 hours surveying the area around Gibraltar, and the Navy went behind it for 21 hours, telling the Spaniards that they were in British territorial waters. Where is the Navy, the British Navy of the past? Where is the guts? We don't want anyone to have a fight over that, of course, but there are diplomatic ways that they can be affected. A lot of wine is drunk in Spain, rather in England from Spain. So we are boycotting it in Gibraltar. And fruits and vegetables. And the bullfights, ban them. And we get into this stupid comments by the FCO that diplomatic approaches have been made at the highest level, that Mr. Cameron has called the Spanish Prime Minister and told him off, that Mr. Hague has called his counterpart and told him off. What Mr. Cameron and Mr. Hague don't know, that these two individuals are sons and products of the Franco era, and they care two hoots about England or anybody else, because they're selfish individuals. And then we move on to having harassment of this long queues that we have to suffer, which is the tourists, and stop trade from Main Street. That is the whole purpose of it, is to ruin us. Just like Franco did in '69. But Franco got unstuck. He had an individual such as myself in government at the time, and today we have very good people fighting for us. And we will fight with the help of the English people and the English public to survive and to prosper. And we will. Paul mentioned that France has 27, you said? Well, France, Holland, Denmark, Portugal, and Spain all have overseas territories, and all of them have integrated all their territories into their mother countries, and all of them have MPs in the mother country and in Europe, but not Gibraltar. The FCO left Gibraltar and all the other overseas territories, by the way, out in the cold. But Gibraltar was special because Gibraltar was and is in Europe. So therefore we had an entitlement to be there, to have been drawn in as part of the family. But that didn't happen. The Foreign Office refused for years and years that Gibraltar had the vote in Europe. It refused for years and years and years that Gibraltar became a full British, the people of Gibraltar became full British citizens. Luckily, with perseverance, we have now full British citizenship and full EU membership. But we cannot rest on our laurels like that. Like Paul said, we need to move forward. And to be forward Gibraltar and secure Gibraltar needs to be seen as being part of Great Britain, because we are part of Great Britain. If we are part of this region for the EU vote, and how ridiculous can it get? How can you segregate one thing from the other? So what is right should be that we are given a voice in Westminster. However they like to imagine it or figure it out. But we need to have a voice. We need to be seen to be part of Great Britain, because we know that the British public is with Gibraltar. And we know that if that happens, then our enemies are going to stay a little bit further away. Whereas today, they keep on being contemptuous, challenging not only us. They don't challenge us, they're challenging Britain. The Union Jack, that's what they challenge. They don't care about Cameron. They don't care about Hague. They have total disrespect. There is only one thing that Spain knows in Europe, and that is how to get money. They spent 20 years as a beneficiary, full beneficiary of EU funds, and a lot of it from England. And today we hear every day in the press, we hear, not surprisingly, of some minister or another, of some scandal, of somebody having pocketed so much here and so much there. And the corruption goes from the very top to the very bottom. When we complain to Europe about, what was that, 2 minutes? 1 minute. Quickly, when we complained to the European Commission that we were being harassed, they said they were going to send a commission to investigate, and they gave 1 month's notice to Spain that this was going to happen. Guess what? When the commission arrived at the border, you think there was queues at the border? No, of course not. How stupid can you get? But the week before, we hear in the press that Spain has awarded the President of Europe a Medal of Honor with a ticket of 45,000 euros. So we didn't get the report was not favorable for Gibraltar. We have to appeal it now. So ladies and gentlemen, I am getting the flashes here that it's about time and it's a great regret I have no more time to give you. But once again, it has been a tremendous pleasure to address the British public, especially the people of the constituency that I belong to. I knew this area very well, and I used to come here on holiday when I lived in Basingstoke, and I enjoyed Torquay quite a lot. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart, not only from me, but from the people of Gibraltar. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that's quite simply that the leader of a party is the most priceless and positive media asset that party has. The leader is the chief strategist, decision maker and communicator. That won't have surprised you either. What may surprise you though, I think, is an assessment of just how much more important the leader is as a communicator in the modern media age than are the rest of us combined. In the bigger, the longer established parties, a leader is perhaps 60% of what makes them electable or otherwise. In a newer party like ours, you can make it 70%. And when you have a leader like Nigel Farage, you can up that further. In fact, I'd say 85% of our positive impact in the media is down to the efforts of one man. Now, that leaves 15%. 10% I would accord to Paul Nuttall, the best deputy leader in British politics by far. So those of you with GCSE A-star arithmetic may have worked out that leaves 5% of potential upside for all the rest of us combined. Now that's not a negligible proportion because politics is often decided on fine margins. So if all of us who speak for this party in public can make an optimal contribution, we can help a significant amount. And that includes MEP candidates like me, councillors at every level of local government, and people on social media who have identified themselves as UKIP members or sympathisers too. But now here comes the scary bit. Along with the 5% of potential upside that we can provide is a downside potentially 10 times as large if we mess up. There is among media outlets unsympathetic to UKIP a fairly determined bid to portray us as cranks or extremists. So if any of us behave in a cranky or extreme way, that gives them a free hit. It allows the impression to take hold potentially that what may in fact have been an aberration by a normally sensible person somehow typifies our whole party when it does not. Without trying to sound too headmasterly here, I have to say it's all very well to say that UKIP must not be bound by the over-straitened standards of political correctness that confine debate these days, and that's right. No one is proposing that this party should turn into a mid-90s New Labour style pager operation where people have texted the line to tape. I would never do that. It's not what the British people expect of us either. And quite frankly, I know I would rightly get short shrift from you if I ever tried. But that doesn't mean there are no sensible limits when we conduct ourselves representing the party. To put it bluntly, and this is the key point I need to make today, we will ask for your help in getting across our messages and our arguments that we know are the ones that drive voters towards us in the greatest numbers. And it's a vital bit of help you can give us on that. The key thing is that it's our patriotic duty, all of us, to win, because we are not one of the bog standard political parties. We really believe in something important. We believe in restoring self-government to this great nation of ours. So it's our duty to maximise the chances of winning. I want UKIP to carry on being fun, but I want the fun to be waking up on the day of the results and seeing that we've won again. Let's make that our fun, not using the party as some kind of gentleman's club for the sheer enjoyment of provoking outrage. I think those days are gone, and we are now a party of winners. We're serious about our politics and will enjoy the crestfallen look on our opponents' faces when the results of elections are read out. And let's keep that in mind. Because on the big issues, the people are with us. On immigration, 70% of people say they want drastic reductions, and my goodness, those figures published yesterday, didn't that show our case is right? And under open-door immigration from the EU, David Cameron has no quality control and no volume control either. So how he felt able to make a promise about the number that net immigration would reach, I don't know. But it's a pretty cynical politician who makes promises he can't deliver and lets the people down on one of their key public concerns.
I want one to wear at the council.
Now, on the EU itself, more than half of those polled say they would want to leave and they would vote to leave. On foreign aid, 2 out of 3 voters say they deplore the ring fence against public spending cuts that are affecting our other public services. They're not in favour of the £13 billion a year foreign aid industry. That will be the figure in the next financial year. We're the one party that says this 0.7% of GDP target is ridiculous. We know the British people are compassionate. We're compassionate too. We believe in aid for famine relief, aid for inoculating babies against infectious diseases. What we don't believe in is subsidising corrupt third world regimes. And of course we believe that since we have an aid budget, that in times of crisis on the home front, it should be available, or some of it at least, to help out our own communities when they've been overwhelmed by natural disasters too. And on law and order, we know that most people are with us, that they deplore this move to so-called community punishments that's been pioneered by the other 3 parties. I always think they're only called community punishments because it's invariably the community that gets punished. And on grammar schools, there's a massive appetite in this country for a return to the option of academic selection within the state system, so that bright kids from non-privileged backgrounds can once more give all those old Etonians a run for their money. And on the European Court of Human Rights, that friend to preachers of hate and foreign criminals too. Well, let's just put it like this. Were there a referendum ever on Britain's membership of that, our side would win that one by an absolute landslide. Don't we know it? And on energy prices, the other lot, Miliband, when he was in power, put through this Climate Change Act 2008 with the encouragement of David Cameron and Nick Clegg too. It puts hundreds of pounds on people's energy bills. It actually drives heavy industry away from Britain, taking much needed skilled industrial jobs with it, often relocating them in countries like India and China with lower environmental standards than ours, so you don't even get any emissions reduction. Precisely the opposite happens. We're the party that would sweep that away. The other three would keep it. And that's another issue where more and more people are realising that we've got it right. But aside from immigration and EU membership itself, little is heard of these other popular policies and positions that we hold. My job is to help change that. And your job, I would suggest, is to help me by avoiding, as far as you can, the elephant traps set by us in the media. And the person we need to help most of all is our brilliant leader. He's a man who works under enormous pressure and at an amazing pace. And an intensity indeed that's difficult sometimes to believe. I worked in newspapers for 25 years, turning around things very quickly for daily deadlines. And I've worked for Nigel Farage for about 25 days. And I can tell you, I'm feeling the pace. So, let me ask you, everyone in this hall, let's resolve for each of us to do all we can to help him, to take just a fraction of that pressure off his shoulders, to make the job he does so brilliantly a little more manageable by not being the person who brings upon him a difficulty, a question potentially to throw him off the messages that he wants to convey and that he knows the British people are with us over. It might not be the most exciting thing for me to say to you that we've all got to do our work and concentrate and be responsible, but the cause is so important. It's not just a matter of manoeuvring one set of people into ministerial office at the expense of another and nothing changes. We are the party that loves Britain. We are the party that believes in our country, and we are the party that wants our country yet again to set an example to the rest of the countries of Europe as well. Now, your enthusiasm and appetite for the fray is an enormous motivating factor for those of us at the centre, and we hold even higher responsibilities to focus, to work hard, to remember who we're in it fighting for, and at action days across the country, campaigning days, people turning up for by-election campaigns. That makes it all worthwhile for me when I see the sheer enthusiasm and love of country and willingness to put ourselves, through, or of the members of you, to put yourselves through arduous days, knocking on doors, getting the message out there, ignoring the smears of our opponents, keeping positive because we know we have the best arguments. I would like you to give yourselves a round of applause, because I'd like to say thank you for the brilliant work that UKIP members have done over the last 12 months as well. So well done. And wasn't it a great session from John Bickley and Lisa Duffy? That was a brilliant campaign because yet again the Labour Party in this instance did its trick of compressing the campaign down to the shortest possible number of days while also maxing out the postal vote. So postal votes going out before all the candidates have even been confirmed, that seems pretty strange politics to me. It's deliberately designed to make it much harder for an insurgent party, a party challenging the Lib Lab Con, to get momentum in a campaign. But anyone who knows Lisa knows that momentum begins the moment she arrives in the constituency. And that happened in Wythenshawe as well. And John Bickley really took the battle to the Labour Party there. And when he said, and the thing I remember, and I'm afraid I do remember politics in sound bites to an extent, that the Labour Party has betrayed the working people of this country, and more of them realise it. So there are twice as many of us as there were after the general election of 2010. We do have, as a journalist put it to me today, to deal with that problem, the problem of growing pains, of growing fast. And it's a very unusual problem in British politics today. I don't think the other parties have put forward the idea that party membership is a dying thing just because their own policies don't appeal to normal people, their own memberships slide. And how many members has David Cameron lost in the years when he's been Tory leader? Well, I think probably over 100,000 have gone. And I say let's keep Dave in office because he's doing us great service. But we face the opposite problem, and it's a problem I much prefer. We're like the football club with rising gates every week. We're climbing the tables. We're getting there step by step. And we believe that we can, if we all work together and do our work responsibly, we can win those European elections. But let's not forget, the man who will lead us to that, who will make by far the biggest contribution we all must support, is our brilliant leader, our irrepressible. For you all to give the most fantastic welcome to the man who's inspired me to come into politics full-time, Nigel Farage.
Good morning, everybody. What a wonderful, warm introduction. In fact, it rather reminds me of the introduction that Angela Merkel got in Downing Street yesterday. At least that was the welcome she got when she arrived. It was a little different when she left, wasn't it? Did you see Dave's face? Because I think actually what Angela Merkel exposed yesterday was that renegotiation, fundamental renegotiation of Britain's relationship with the European Union is something that has been put out by David Cameron to kick the issue into the long grass beyond the next general election. It is not obtainable, it is not achievable. Renegotiation is a con. No question about that. Now, the last time we were here in this hall was for our annual conference in September 2010. And just perhaps remind ourselves where we were as a party in September 2010. We were without a leader. We were bumping along at 2.5% in the opinion polls. The fact we'd done well the year before in a European election made no difference. We were making no real impact in domestic politics, in local elections, or indeed in by-elections. I think, were demoralised by only getting 3% in the general election, and I faced personally quite a big decision. I'd led the party up until 2009. I'd gone away to pursue other political ideas and hobbies, and I very nearly got myself killed. And I have to say, in the September of 2010, I genuinely didn't know whether I was fit enough and strong enough to come back and do this job again. And I have, of course, since then, had to have quite a big operation. But being here today, in the spring of 2014, I have to say, I'm really pleased that I made the right decision back in 2010. What a privilege it's been. What a privilege it's been. Because Just look at the progress we've made. We've doubled our membership. We're nearing 35,000 members. Our opinion poll ratings aren't 2.5%. They vary between 12 and 18%. And we've come second in the last 6 parliamentary by-elections. And last year, in the English County Council elections, we got a quarter of the vote across the country. This party is on the march. Indeed, I think and believe that we are posing the biggest threat to the political establishment that has been seen in modern times. And it's because of that that we're met with such a degree of derision. We're told that the UKIP vote is just a protest vote. Well, that's not, the morning after the Eastleigh by-election, when I walked down that street with Diane James, people came up to me and said, Nigel, we're not protest voters. We believe in everything UKIP stands for. And the opinion poll shows 61% of UKIP voters vote for us because they believe in our policies, not just on the European question, but on the broader range of domestic issues as well. And the other attempt that is being made to downplay UKIP, and this is very much a Westminster bubble mindset, is to say that UKIP is just a splinter group of the Tory party. And that I can see the Tory party is very popular in this room. UKIP is somehow just a splinter of the Tory party. In fact, the impression is given that every single UKIP voter is a retired half-colonel living on the edge of Salisbury Plain. I bet there's 1 or 2 half-colonels in the room this morning. There always are. When the truth of it is that our growth in support since 2010 has come from across the political spectrum. You know, you've seen John Bickley on this platform this morning, our candidate in the recent Wythenshawe by-election. You know, John comes from a Labour background. 2/3 of our voters did not vote Conservative at the last general election. And 1/5 of our voters are people who would be described as non-voters. People who haven't voted for 20 years. In some cases, people who've never voted in their lives. And they're going out and voting UKIP. And I think we should be very proud of the fact that we are re-engaging people back in British democracy. I really do. And of course, any comment that is ever so slightly eccentric, made by any one of our volunteer party, is very quickly turned into a national news scandal. I mean, there was the issue of the councillor from Oxfordshire. Now, when he was a Conservative councillor and saying the same thing, it wasn't a news story. But he defects to UKIP and suddenly it is a major national scandal. Although, it is raining outside. I promised everybody I wouldn't say that, but there we are. Okay, we've had 1 or 2 bad people, we've got rid of them. But quite honestly, when you look at the people in UKIP, we come from a very broad range of backgrounds, from the left, from the centre, from the right. Most people in UKIP who stand as candidates or who are branch officers have never been involved in politics before. You know, people will make the odd mistake. We're not politically cracked, and I would rather lead a party where perhaps the odd person said something that doesn't conform to the current PC climate in this country. I'd rather lead a party like that than be a member of a party run by a political class who don't actually dare say what they think, who are not in politics out of conviction, and who have betrayed this country and the people of this country and sold us out to Brussels and elsewhere. They've given away our borders. They've given away the supremacy of our law. They've given away the supremacy of our courts. They have, despite their promises at every single general election, done everything they can to make sure that we don't get a referendum so that we can determine our own future. And who is speaking up? Who is speaking up for ordinary working people in this country? Well, certainly not the Liberal Democrats. There's more on them in a moment, I promise you. And certainly not the Conservative Party, but you would have thought, wouldn't you? You would have thought that the Labour Party and the big trade union bosses in this country would be the people that would stand up to defend the rights of ordinary working class people in this country. But I'm afraid they have been so taken in by the Brussels dream, by the idea of creating a United States of Europe, that they have allowed, over the course of the last 10 to 15 years, uncontrolled, open-door, mass immigration, which has hurt the people lowest down the salary scale in this country, and only UKIP will stand up and defend ordinary men and women in Britain. So we've got 84 days to go until May the 22nd. I know this because I tick off the days every morning. We've got 84 days to go with these European elections, and I want us to be the patriotic fight back. I want us to be the people who say we are proud of our country, we wish to govern ourselves. I want us to say to the electorate, don't get mad, get even. Go out and vote UKIP on May the 22nd. I genuinely believe that if we get this right, if we get this campaign right, then on May the 22nd, we can cause the biggest political shock that has been seen in modern British political history. We can cause an earthquake on May the 22nd by winning the European elections. But there's another set of elections taking place on that day that at the moment are unnoticed and uncommented on. There are thousands of local council seats that will be contested on the same day as the European elections. And I'm pleased this morning to tell you that already UKIP have 2,500 candidates standing for us on May the 22nd. This will be our biggest electoral effort ever. So my thanks go to all our candidates, to all our branch officers. My thanks go to our voluntary party. My thanks go to our membership. And it's worth reminding people that while the odd councillor may have made comments that have attracted negative publicity, actually UKIP is doing very well in local government. Our county councillors, the 150 of them that were elected last year, have the highest attendance records in the county halls up and down the country. And in two counties, we have actually managed, because of the UKIP presence, to break the cabinet system of government and UKIP. And we should be, that's good. UKIP in local government is beginning to undo some of the damage done by the Blair years, and it's a process we must continue. Let's get hundreds of councillors elected on May the 22nd, on the same day as the European elections. And something else has changed since 2010, since we were last here for a conference. UKIP itself has changed in terms not just of its support amongst the electorate, but in terms of the people within UKIP. There's a much more diverse range of people from all sorts of different backgrounds who are taking part and standing as candidates for UKIP. And the other thing that's really changed is one of the criticisms of UKIP, and it was a fair one, was that it was all men running it. Well, that's changed hugely since 2010. We have a party director who's female. And if you look at the European election lists, whilst it's true that fewer women than men put their names forward, just look at how those women have done in an open ballot of you for membership. We have women candidates at number 1 and number 2 on the list, up and down the country. And here's the key point. We've achieved that in UKIP without using positive discrimination. We've achieved it in UKIP without using all-female shortlists. We've achieved it in UKIP on merit, and that is the model we want for this country. In fact, there are some mutterings now that perhaps there's going to be a female takeover of UKIP. And I would say this, I think it's more likely that the next leader of UKIP is a woman than any of the other political parties. So I think we put to bed that myth that it's just a party of men. Now, the campaign itself, over the next 84 days, what kind of campaign will it be? Well, thanks to Nick Clegg, I think really rather interesting. And I'm looking forward to going head-to-head with Clegg on these debates. It's a great shame that Mr Cameron and Mr Miliband have refused to join us, but nonetheless, those of us that have been in UKIP for 20 years have waited all this time to have a proper full national debate about European Union membership, and it's going to happen. And this will be the first ever European election campaign in which EU-related issues will dominate the agenda, and that, I think, is all to the good. I also, whilst I'm at it, must thank somebody else, my personal pin-up girl for the year. There's no question in my mind as to who it is. She comes from Luxembourg, and she is European Commission Vice President Viviane Reding. She was in, no, don't boo her, she's marvellous. She's a godsend, sir. What are you talking about? I mean, she was in London the other day, and she was saying that 70% of our laws are made by the European Union. Yes, we agree, Commissioner Reding. We agree. She thought we were too stupid to have a referendum in this country to decide whether we should stay in the European Union. So I want to make this offer now to Viviane Reding. I'm personally prepared to pay for you to speak in every major British city between now and May the 22nd. It will be an enormous help. Now, what are you going to see over the next 84 days? You're going to see the establishment coming together. You will see one or two of the big banks. You will see one or two of the giant multinationals. You will see all three political parties and many of their friends in the print media. And the establishment line will be trotted out. And it is, of course, that if we weren't part of the European Union, if we weren't governed by the great Herman Van Rompuy and his friends in Brussels, we wouldn't be able to do any business, and 3 million British people would lose their jobs. That's the line they're going to trot out. And of course it says a lot, actually, about a political class who've never had a job in their lives and have never worked in the real world. They think that politicians create business. It's not politicians that create business. Business is created because goods and services are produced and consumers choose to buy them. That's how business is created. And you may have noticed that the United Kingdom is now the #1 export destination for Germany in the world. There is no prospect of a trade war with Germany. Mercedes, Audi and Volkswagen would not allow the German Chancellor to enter into such a trade war because we buy more from them than they do from us. And anybody that lives in the real world knows it's the customer that's king and we are the buyers. It's as simple as that. And we'll be told that we need to be in the European Union for greater global influence. This is the rubbish that's been trotted out, starting with Roy Jenkins and going on with the Foreign Office for the last 40 years. Greater global influence. Well, how is an unelected Brussels bureaucrat increasingly speaking for us on foreign policy, with William Hague, it would appear, on holiday most of the time? How is that greater global influence for this country? It isn't. It's a diminution. And what about trade? What about trade? When the World Trade Organization meet to discuss global trade rules, the British delegates have to leave the room because we're members of a customs union in which we are now forbidden from making our own trade relationships with any other part of the world. Europe is actually declining as a percentage of global trade with every single year. It's the rest of the world that's growing, isn't it? It's Singapore, it's India, it's Brazil, it's China. And we would have much greater global influence if we were able to negotiate our own trade deals ourselves. And this idea that we're not big enough, Iceland, 320,000 people, Iceland last year signed a trade deal with China. If Iceland can do it, then we with 64 million people most certainly can do it. But that is not the issue that will dominate these European elections. The issue that will dominate the European elections is the number one issue in British politics, and that is that the vast majority of us, nearly 80% of us in this country, believe that open-door immigration is irresponsible, against the interests of the people of this country, and that it must stop. That is the issue that will dominate the European elections. We have seen, since 2004, a doubling of youth unemployment. We've seen since that time wage compression. People doing jobs now taking home less money than they were 10 years ago. And all of this has happened because we now have a totally distorted labour market in Britain because of the massive oversupply that has come to us from Eastern Europe. It's ordinary folk, it's ordinary families that are paying the financial price for this. But what about the social price of this? The fact that in scores of our cities and market towns, this country, in a short space of time, has frankly become unrecognisable. Whether it's the impact on local schools and hospitals, whether it's the fact that in many parts of England you don't hear English spoken anymore, this is not the kind of community we want to leave to our children and grandchildren. 80% of people were opposed to opening the door fully on the 1st of January this year to Romania and Bulgaria. And yet the three so-called main parties did not lift a finger to stop that from happening. Did you see the figures yesterday on immigration, by the way? Anybody notice that? An increase in net migration last year of 40%, and nearly 100% of it coming from European Union countries. You know, it isn't directly Romania and Bulgaria that I'm necessarily concerned about. What I'm really concerned about is the fact that in the Eurozone, in the Mediterranean, there is no sign or prospect of any significant recovery at all. In fact, it is most likely that the majority of Romanians that come to Britain don't come from Romania. They will come from Italy and Spain, where there are already 1 million Romanian migrant workers. If the Eurozone goes as badly over the next few years as I still believe that it will, we face the prospect of the largest migratory wave that has ever come to this country, and we have three political parties who are not prepared to do anything about it. And so, these European elections are about EU membership, they're about open borders, they're about the fact that you cannot have your own immigration policy and remain a member of the European Union. And what we've got to say to the British people is this: if you support open door immigration, if you want to continue with this process, that's fine. Vote Labour, vote Conservative, vote Liberal Democrat. But if you believe that we should govern our borders, if you believe that we should control immigration, if you believe we should have a sensible immigration policy, where we have not just quantity control, but we have quality control as well, if you believe we should model our immigration system along the lines of a country like Australia, then vote UKIP on May the 22nd. And there's something else I want us to do in this campaign. We as a party have claimed back the idea that debating the European issue is not some disreputable, appalling thing to do. We have made the European debate respectable in this country. We have made the immigration debate. Remember 10 years ago? You couldn't talk about immigration. Somehow if you did, it meant you were a terribly awful, bad person. But we in UKIP have taken that issue head on, and I think proved the point that it is not extremist to talk about immigration, it is the responsible and right thing to do, to talk about immigration. But what I want us to do in this campaign is I want us to make it once again respectable, to make it once again something that is not sneered at, for us to be able to stand up and say we are patriotic and we are proud of who we are as a nation and who we are as a people. Let's make patriotism a respectable political idea in Britain again. Our ruling classes have lost confidence in this country, and that's why they've sold us out, and it's cost us money, it's cost us influence, and it's cost us self-respect. And they also appear to be wholly unfit to even manage anything in this country either, because they've handed down most of the responsibility of government to quangos, generally run by failed former politicians. As we're in the West Country, you might have guessed, I'm talking about the Environment Agency. It is astonishing to me that the Environment Agency's priorities for now nearly 10 years have been to maintain the EU Habitats Directive, to put the interests of wading birds, molluscs, beetles and water voles above the interests of farmers and householders on the Somerset level. They've even effectively been stopped from dredging, because that is now classed as industrial waste and costs a lot of money. Well, I think there needs to be an immediate public inquiry into the way in which the Environment Agency have operated, why they have not put the interests of householders and farmers first. And I must say, going and visiting not just Somerset but the Thames Valley as well makes me believe that this is a strange, unnatural disaster that has happened in this country. We all know that the insurance companies will not fully compensate everybody, and so I reiterate today my call for us to take just a tiny percentage of the foreign aid budget to compensate people in this country who've suffered in these floods. Surely this is a time when the principle of charity begins at home needs to be put into action. But I'm going to talk a lot more, we're all going to talk a lot more about domestic policies post the May 22nd election. Let's keep our national campaign focused on the European question and the consequences of it. After May the 22nd, we will talk about domestic policies, and we will produce a manifesto that this time doesn't resemble war and peace, okay? You have my absolute promise that we will do that, and we will get that right. But for the next 84 days, let's say to ourselves that this is the moment that we've waited for. This is it. This is the big one for UKIP. Together, we can achieve something remarkable in these European elections. We can top those polls. And if we top those polls, forward to a general election a year after that. We will have to put in place some pretty ruthless targeting strategies, but it is not inconceivable that a good number of UKIP people can be elected to the House of Commons. It will only happen if we effectively clear this hurdle on May the 22nd. Do you know, we carry now on our, do our absolute best to say to them, help us to help you. Together we can get our country back. Together we can put back the pride and self-respect that we ourselves feel in our nation and in our people. And I think we've got the message right. Love Britain, vote UKIP. Thank you very much indeed.
Kicking us off this afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, is one of the towering figures of our movement, a man who we have been enormously privileged to have as our treasurer for the last 3 years, and who has done an immense amount to help with the growth and development of our party. So I would like you all please to put your hands together for Stuart Wheeler.
Mr. Chairman and Conference, my name is indeed Stuart Wheeler and I am indeed the Treasurer. But the only other bit of that introduction which is really right is that this is the graveyard session. And the reason I'm invariably put on for the graveyard session is, of course, because I'm the most unpopular speaker at every conference. Because all I ever do is ask you for money. So normally you have gone to sleep, but I want you to wake up now because I have some important things to say. Now, the first question I'm going to ask you, if I know how to work it, is that one there. What are the things that you need to win an election? Yes, well done, you're well educated. Here's the American answer. Money, money, and money. Well, yes, there are other things. We need Nigel Farage as well. But there's a grain of, more than a grain of truth in it, though. Now, I thought you might like to know some of the things we want to spend the money on. And there they are. I shall come back to them individually, but very briefly, quite shortly. Now, the person who is in charge of winning this election, under Nigel, of course, is Neil Hamilton. And he has a very clear idea about how we're going to win, what we need to do, and has a detailed plan. And in my view, it's an excellent plan, and you will be hearing from him, I think, in about half an hour. But the plan, though excellent, is not cheap. And we do need everyone in UKIP to just give us that tiny bit more, or even more than a tiny bit more, to take us over the top and run that truly effective and final campaign which will enable us to win when it works. Now, I am approaching, obviously, our big donors and our big potential donors, but I'm approaching everyone. In approaching you lot, I've been hesitant about whether I should, because you've all paid to come here, and many, many of you, I know very well, have been incredibly hard-working activists and had a huge amount of good for us in that way as well. Nevertheless, we do need that final amount. And so, buckets please. Here is a bucket. And I am putting a note in the bucket. But you may be sorry to hear, I hope you're not, that they are now going to be passed round. And I hope very much that you will find you can put something in, and preferably put in more than you really meant to. So I hope you don't mind me, in spite of how much you've already contributed, asking you in this way. Now, we must win. We really do need to win. It will completely transform British politics when we do. Nigel has said that we definitely are going to win, and I think that he is right. I think we shall win. But it is a close thing. Peter Kellner, who is a YouGov political pollster, the other day put Labour Party for the European elections on 32%, and he put us on 26%. But he added that he thought there was a very good chance that UKIP would catch up Labour. Thank you, but it is far from a certainty. We all have to do the very best we can. Now, you might be interested to know, those of you who haven't been reading the Mail assiduously, that Michael Hensel, who has been, I think I'm right in saying, the biggest Tory donor ever, has become so fed up with Cameron for a number of reasons that not only is he not going to support the Conservatives anymore, he is demanding, I'm told, by the journalist, £2.5 million loan which he had made to the Tories to be repaid. Not the best news, obviously, as the Tories face the European and then the general election. So I just thought you might like to know that. I know that you will want to shed a tear for David Cameron, but harden your hearts. UKIP is going to save this country by achieving what it wants, getting us out of the EU, and so there's no room for tears. We've all got to do everything we possibly can to achieve the result that we want, which I think we shall achieve, but it has to be worked at. Now, behind us came the Tories, some way behind, and some considerable further way behind, the Lib Dems. And I think those of you who listened this morning to Nigel's speech, he always speaks extremely well, but to my mind this was an absolutely exceptional speech by him, really good. So it seems to me pretty clear that once he's had his debate with Clegg, the already huge difference in the polls between us and the Liberal Democrats is likely to increase still further. Now, I said that I would come back briefly to the items on the list I showed you earlier. So this is the first one. Billboards. You're probably all familiar with those. They're the ones you see on the motorway, big ones, big advertisements, or in underground stations and so forth. They're very well known to be effective. All the parties use them. They're very expensive, but we have to do them. Then, party election broadcasts. Ours are going to be superb. We have the best conceivable producer and director, and they're going to be absolutely marvelous. You must watch and listen to them when they come, and I urge you also to get your friends to do the same. They don't come cheap, however. Then, election addresses. These are absolutely crucial. These are the pamphlets or whatever that every party gets delivered before a major election, and they're said to be free in the sense that the post office does not charge for delivering one to each voter, and that's fantastic. But they're still very expensive. We have to buy the paper, we have to get this stuff printed, and then, which you might be surprised to hear, costs more than those two items put together. We have to bundle them up in a very specific way so that the post office is willing to deliver them in that form. So that's that one, absolutely crucial. The roadshow, 9 days booked already. Well, that's Nigel Farage's roadshow, and of course, just like the other leaders, he's got to have proper security. And the very unfair thing is that the Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition, and Nick Clegg get all their security paid for by the state, and the Leader of UKIP does not, ostensibly because we have no MPs. Now that is particularly unfair when we already have more MEPs than either the Labour Party or the Liberal Democrats. It's unfair, but there it is. And so that's another item. Now, I'm not going to talk about that because I'm not. Hey! Nor that. So I hope none of you saw those two slides. Because I've had very strict instructions about this. We have some things I have not talked to you about, which are going to be incredibly effective. So effective that I've strict instructions after I drafted that on no account am I to give you the details, because we do not want our opponents copying them and having the same advantage that we are in fact going to have over them. So I'm afraid you just have to wait and see. Now, finally, many of you, if not all of you, will have heard that Paul Sykes, a businessman who's come from absolutely nothing to make a massive fortune, is being extraordinarily generous to UKIP. He is going to spend an awful lot of money helping us with our campaign because he believes, like the rest of us do, that we must get out of the EU. He certainly deserves that clap. But understand this, he is not going to pay for absolutely everything. Definitely not. He's going to give us a great deal, but he won't pay for everything. So we really do need, coming back to the same point, we need your support to take us over the top and make the campaign so special that our confidence in winning becomes even greater. Now, one other person who's been helpful, very helpful, in getting money to us is Mark Harland, who you're going to hear in a moment. And he came to us, I don't know, 5 years ago or something, with the idea of the sovereign draw. I'm not going to tell you about it because he's going to tell you about it. It's now got, after a slow start, to a point where it's producing significant money for UKIP and giving everyone a lot of fun at the same time. So I shan't go on about that. That's the end of me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, honoured guests, for being here. Yes, 4 years ago on this platform, I gave my first ever speech to a political party's conference. I was simply a lawyer working in the city. I wasn't a member, but I was frustrated about the way that EU regulations were impacting my industry. I was concerned about the way the government allowed this to happen. And I was saddened that instead of helping our industry, they simply ignored it when we should have been free in the global economy to actually build. Well, 4 years later, I can tell you, I am a member, I am an activist, I am a campaigner, I am your spokesman, I am one of you, and by goodness, it's great to be back. There is a Chinese proverb that we live in interesting times, but I actually believe we always live in interesting times. But for so many in this country and across Europe, the times aren't interesting. They're a time of struggle. Struggle to pay the bills and find the money to pay the energy. A struggle to find a job and keep it in uncertain times. A struggle to remain healthy when the stresses of life are burdening them. My role as UKIP's economic spokesman is to develop policy and ensure that we have the right economic future so that those people no longer have to think about a struggle, but they can look positively to the future for themselves, their families, and their children. We must let human dignity be the simple touchstone of our beliefs and be the measure of our success. And in doing so, we must answer the questions that they will ask of us. How will you achieve that success? How will you manage our taxes and spending? How will you manage our country inside and, in my view, outside of the European Union? Only by setting out a strong and robust economic case on the economy will we be able to gain the positive values that these people are looking for. And only will we be able to win over those who are wavering on the issue of economics. And for those, we have a case to make, and my case is clear. Europe is in decline, it is a failed project, and the European dreams are failing because of membership of the European Union. Britain has not grown. Our economy is still damaged because of our membership of the European Union. The British economy is in danger And this is caused by old parties who no longer have the solutions to the problems and look to the past instead of the future. We need to have a new economic liberalism that embraces the economies of the Commonwealth and other parts of the wider world to challenge the economic doctrines of stagnation and give people back hope. Now, after the last war, it was inevitable that with those who wanted to stop seeing the blood of their children across the lands of Europe. And with such lofty ideals, there were those who went away and conjured up the idea of a European federation. It was founded on the principles of ensuring poverty, hopelessness and despair would no longer be part of the European ideal. The cry of federalism was strong. However, during this economic crisis, we saw a very different vision of Europe. I look at Greece, a country I know well and with friends that I have there, a nation brought low as it was engulfed by the weight of its mountainous debt, economic mismanagement and the hubris of its politicians. One moment in particular brought home to me the torrid story of the failure in that country and the failure of the economic dream of Europe. On the 4th of April 2012, a 77-year-old retired pharmacist stood 100 yards from the Greek Parliament. There were passers-by heard him say a few words, and I repeat, "I have debts. I cannot stand it no more. I don't want to leave those debts to my children." A few minutes later, he shot himself. He shot himself on the steps of a country that founded freedom and democracy. And in his suicide note, he said the government had annihilated hope. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the government in Greece and the governments of the EU have annihilated hope for 28% of the people in Greece who are unemployed. They have annihilated hope for the 61% of young people under the age of 25 without a job. Depressions are on the rise. Suicides are up by 40%. 85% of Greek students living abroad no longer want to go back to their homeland. The Greek debt stands at 340 billion, and if you took €1 side by side and added it together, it would go round the earth 1,800 times. That is the scale of the destruction the European Union has put upon that country, and it is scandalous. But it is not only Greece that has suffered. In Portugal, the scale of youth emigration is at all-time highs. At Lisbon's Portela airport, you often see up to 200 families leaving their country each day. And it's in a country where 41% of young women are unemployed. In Spain, they talk about a lost generation. A youth unemployment there is 50%. We can see what's happening in France. We see the debt in Italy. We see how crushed Ireland has been. The European economies are struggling under the weight of their debt and unemployment. The misery is unspeakable and unimaginable. Yes, the EU may have been created on lofty principles, but the results are clear. The economic system is a failure. And yet those in power have no solution except one thing: more Europe. You hear their cry. Perhaps they never heard the words of Albert Camus, who said, "Good intentions may do as much harm as malevolence if they lack understanding." Well, the EU lacks the understanding of the common people because they are in their lofty hierarchy of the European Union's institutions. But UKIP understands the people. We understand the failed economic model, and that to protect in our interest in this country, we must leave before we are engulfed in the same problems that they have.
As there were dreamers in Europe, there are dreamers in Britain. They promote the European Union just as widely and as strongly. They have challenged UKIP and embarked on a scaremongering campaign this country has never seen for any political party before. They say 3 million jobs will be lost. Our car manufacturing would leave. You would see inward investment disappear. We would be the pariah state of the world. But just as in Europe there is a disconnect between the people and the politicians, there is a disconnect between their dream and the reality. In the letters page of the London Evening Standard last night, I read an article about a young student who got 1 degree and also got a PhD. He said he was struggling because he was having to work in shops and coffee shops and bars just to make ends meet. And whereas he wanted to have a real job, he was even finding those difficult to come by because the wages are suppressed and the competition from 4 million immigrants into this country, predominantly from the European Union, were making the living wage lower and his wages lower. That is unacceptable, but that is the cost of the dreamers who believe in the European Union. Now, we mustn't blame those people who want to come here because this is a great country and we've always opened the doors. My family are those who've come from a different country here, and I stand here before you as one of those who've benefited. But his story of hopelessness is not new. It is spread across the whole country, where we've seen the collapse of our farming and fishing industries, our coal and steel, the postal industries affected by European Union regulation. We have watched as unemployment has stabilised at 7%, 3 million people accepted as normal to be unemployed. It's not acceptable to me, and it shouldn't be acceptable to you. These are not the signs of a prosperous union. These are the signs of a failing union. But if the human stories fail to convince you, then perhaps the numbers should. Every year since we've traded with the European Union, we have actually been in an economic deficit with them. This year to the tune of 30 billion, whilst we have a healthy trade of 16 billion with the rest of the world. Less than 15% of GDP is with the EU, but 100% of their regulations impact us. Research by my predecessor, who did such a wonderful job for us as the economic spokesman, Tim Congdon, shows that 10% of our GDP, or 120 billion a year, is what is the real cost of our membership of the European Union. This should be enough to persuade us that our membership is not an economic boom, but an economic albatross. The case for leaving is growing stronger every day. We are told that when Liam Byrne left, he left a note for the George Osborne saying there was no money left. After over a decade in power, the Labour Party had managed to spend the country's income, spend our savings and assets, borrowed up to the hilt, pilloried our pension pots, sullied the lives of pensioners. The scale of economic destruction, it was unmatched by any political party ever before. But for the party that prides itself on representing those on the breadline, the working class, the poor, this is the party that destroyed the grammar school system that gave opportunity to students like me to become a barrister. They put the death knell on training colleges. They helped my uncle become a plumber and then a site manager. They opened a door to mass immigration from the European Union that drove down wages, as I said, that has made life harsher for my cousin who's an electrician. Gordon Brown destroyed the pension system of which my aunt and uncle, as social workers, are now struggling to fight. And they've added green levies that increase our energy costs, so that my mother, instead of having to have a relaxing time as a pensioner, has to work part-time to supplement that just to keep the lights on in the house. As Ronald Reagan said, the left always say with a little more power and a little more money, we can do so much for the people. But they had a lot of power and a lot of money, and they did a lot for the people, their own people. But when the Conservatives came to power, David Cameron came to power with the maxim saying we're all in it together. Well, this is a speech he took, or I understood parts of it, from Bill Clinton's inaugural speech. But there's where the similarity ended. Because whereas a few years later, Bill Clinton was able to stand before the Senate and Congress and say, we are now only 10 billion in our deficit, and within this year we will have a balanced budget. The same cannot be said of David Cameron.
because our debt is still over £1 trillion and our deficit is still over £100 billion. It costs us more than some department budgets just to revalue our debt in the international markets. But there is another cost of Cameron, and that cost is that he's helped to improve the lives of the super wealthy in this country. Although I admit he's managed to help the lives by raising the tax thresholds for the poorest. But there are many on the borders of the 40% tax, the £32,000, those who have to get up hard in the morning and pay high bills for their travel to work on the trains, or high gas bills or high car bills to fill their tanks up, who know what it's like that if they earn a little bit more, they suddenly are in the 40% tax threshold, and suddenly they're worse off. Well, UKIP says, you're not in it together, Mr. Cameron. You are making sure that they suffer, and we will ensure that we will do something to protect you. Ladies and gentlemen, today, by our presence here, all of us have made a commitment to join in battle to defend liberty and to reclaim this great nation from the steady, perilous advance of the EU. But let us not begin by recognising the scale of the task before us, because the forces of illiberalism are strong. They permeate every part of the body politic, our politicians, the unions, the media. They have untold resources from the EU, funding from corporate entities, and they will put many of them on TV. They have inveigled our friends and our cousins across the globe that this new country, the new EU, is a beacon of hope and democracy, when we know that it is exactly the opposite, and it will snuff out the light of freedom. But they have not crushed rebellion yet. The spirit and hunger to control one's own destiny not only lies deep within the soul of the people of this country, but also those of Europe. Today's battle to win the hearts and minds will not be on the fields of Flanders, but airways and TV, in the studios and the papers, on the web, in the homes and our offices. It is here we must respond. It is here where we must set out the case for a positive future for Britain. One of increasing growth, of higher living standards, job security, better education and training. It is here where we set out the case for an independent Britain with UKIP at its helm. Thank you.
To tell us whether he thinks that's actually true.
So will British business collapse if Britain leaves the EU? You know it, but this is the deliberately controversial way in which this question is put by political commentators and the media all the time, and we need to have an effective and effectively communicated answer to it. Otherwise, frightened voters, believing what the established parties will say, will be afraid to vote for us. I think you've heard during the course of this morning's sessions and some of the afternoon sessions that the facts do not give that impression. But I think we need to get that message across consistently, clearly, and really communicate it to the British people, because they are frightened about this topic. From my own point of view, I don't have a series of statistics and surveys to show you. What I have is experience of working both in the UK and in Europe for the last 25 years, predominantly in financial services and in a range of other sectors. I'd like to give you just a few impressions of what is quite a complex topic, but a few of what I think are some of the more important impressions about what it's like to work in Europe, what things might be like if we go forward in Europe, and some of the opportunities as well as the challenges if we were to leave the European Union. First of all, let's be clear. The world trades with Europe and Europe trades with the world. I see competition not just from domestic European companies, but international companies from China, America, Russia, India, you name it. You saw the list of companies that import into the Eurozone this morning in the first speaker session. So I know that those companies are able to trade effectively within the Eurozone in much the same way as we trade in other countries. Some of this is about setting up partnerships with local entities. Some of it's as simple as opening a local office. Some of it we can trade directly to, depending on agreements. But let's be clear, countries that are currently outside the Eurozone have businesses that trade very effectively within Europe, and we can do exactly the same. At the end of the day, when I sit down with some of my European colleagues and we have dinner, maybe the odd glass of wine, inevitably the conversation turns to the European Union. I have to tell you that as businessmen, their primary objective is not political. Their primary objective is to grow their businesses in each and every way that is possible for them. That means developing markets within the Eurozone and outside the Eurozone. Many of them are equally frustrated with the increasing regulation and inward focus that our European diplomats, bureaucrats, politicians are fostering not only upon the United Kingdom, but on the rest of the Eurozone as well. They have to operate within those constraints, and they are equally frustrated. In terms of what life might be like if we continue for the next 5, 10, 15 years within the Eurozone, first of all, let's be clear, this will not bring stability. There is no such thing as the static nature of business. The global economy is changing at an ever-increasing pace, and we can either participate in it or we will get left on the side. In business, change is a constant, and this is a universal rule. So people who tell you that staying within the Eurozone will give business the stability it needs is clearly not a businessman. I think the inward focus and increasing regulation, if history have anything to go by, will turn businesses inward, stifle innovation, stifle investment, certainly from foreign entities, and generally be to the detriment and inefficiency of our own businesses. We will continue to compete within Europe, but our presence and competitive on the global stage in the BRIC economies that are driving the global growth will inevitably be reduced, and we will, over time, feel the pain of that as increasingly jobs are lost out of the UK and indeed the rest of the Eurozone. I do not think that continuing within the EU is either necessary to trade in the European and global stage, nor is it helpful. So what might happen if we leave the EU? Clearly there will be change. Let's not kid ourselves. But as I hope I've explained, change happens every year. I have to learn new regulations, new ways of doing business, new processes that I need to follow every year within the existing EU structure. I am under no doubt that if we leave the EU, we will have a similar set of regulations that we need to learn and adopt. This is actually part of what businesses do naturally every year. So this is not something which is new and is not a radical change. Ultimately, I think it will give UK businesses more opportunity to balance the benefits of trading within the EU and the Eurozone, which is an important part of our economy, but balance it in a meaningful way with trade with the rest of the world. I do have to tell you that in our own business, the real growth sectors in our worldwide portfolio are not within the Eurozone. They are in the BRIC economies, South America, Russia, India, China, the Far East and Asia. These are the places that are growing at 20, 30, 50%. And like many companies, we are targeting some of our best talent to go into the growth areas. It's inevitable. It's what good business does and will continue to do. I think if we have a more balanced view of trade, both within Europe and in the global economy, we will enable ourselves to take more balanced decisions on where to invest globally versus locally. So ultimately, I think this is both a factual topic and really quite an emotive topic. I think it's quite personal how you feel about this topic. I think it comes from a whole range of your own beliefs and the facts that you've heard. But I hope I've given you a very brief and simplified view of why I think this, rather than being the breaking of the British economy, I think this could actually be the making of British business going forward. Thank you very much.
Peter, thank you very much indeed. I'm sure you agree with me, ladies and gentlemen. That was well worth making a little insertion into our programme for. Another little insertion before we carry on. Stuart Wheeler has asked me to thank you for your enormous generosity in the passing of the buckets, which has raised £2,860. And somebody who would particularly like to thank you for that is our campaign director, Neil Hamilton.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, this election campaign, culminating on the 22nd of May, will be the most important test that UKIP has ever been shown. And on the 22nd of May, we have to create that earthquake which Nigel talked about this morning. That is the cover of the European Election Manifesto, which we shall be revealing shortly. Now, we've experienced the floods, next the earthquake. You're thinking, I know, those of you who know about the book of Revelations, that there's something biblical about this. What next? The plague of locusts? Well, I'm sorry to tell you, we've had those around for many, many years. The deracinated political elite of parasites, the bureaucrats, the Eurocrats, the Quangocrats, the expenses fiddlers and assorted chancers, living it up at taxpayers' expense, and it's UKIP's historic role to sweep them all away. Now, several people have said today that despite everybody's expectations, and the way we've been reported in the media in recent times, the election is not in the bag exactly. We are certainly going to do very well, but there is no guarantee that we are going to achieve what we really want to achieve, which is to come top of the poll, beating Labour, the Tories and the Liberals. Stuart told you earlier on that the latest YouGov poll puts Labour on 32 and us on 26%. That has to be considered in the context that our voters are quite naturally much more motivated to go out and vote than Labour voters. So my reading of it is that we are pretty much neck and neck, and therefore we all need to put every possible effort into going that extra mile so that we do end up top of the poll on the 22nd of May, and that really will create the political earthquake that we want to achieve. It is a game of expectations management today, isn't it? Because that brilliant result that we had in the Wythenshawe by-election, where we pushed our percentage of the poll up from 3% to 18%, was portrayed in lots of sections of the media by the commentariat as a bit of a setback. A 600% increase in our vote is a setback. This is a different dictionary from the one I have on my bookshelves, but this is the way it will be reported. If we don't come top of the poll, if we miss it by one vote, if we don't come top of the poll, that will be presented as a setback in the media. And we have to disappoint them, don't we, by
And the best way to do that is to put every effort that we possibly can into winning the election. Now, I'm not going to unveil all the details of our campaign today. Stuart has already told you we need to raise a very large sum of money, and it's true. I could spend legally in this campaign £3.2 million. And even if Paul Sykes is extremely generous to us in what he spends in this campaign, he isn't going to donate anything like £3.2 million to the causes that we want to spend the money on. So we do, unfortunately, have to continue to fundraise as though there was no tomorrow. I can promise you that we will have a massive blitz of billboards around the country. The UKIP name will be plastered everywhere. We will have ad vans as well, taking the message around in mobile form. We've already distributed 4.5 million UKIP newspapers this year in our Project Commuter, which we undertook in January, and 5 million leaflets. We are revamping the website, UKIP website, so that within a few weeks we'll have a completely new, all-singing, all-dancing website, able to do so much more than the one that we've had for a little while. We're going to spend a lot more time and money on social media. This is the method of communication of the future, and amongst young people, of course, it is the way that they do communicate with one another. Stuart mentioned the party election broadcasts earlier on. We will be entitled to several of these. We don't exactly know how many as yet, but we will be entitled to free airtime, and we can choose more or less what goes in the broadcast. I can tell you that they will be hard-hitting, dramatic, and entertaining. Party election broadcasts are usually the excuse to go out and put the kettle on, aren't they? Well, there's no point in our spending money on an election broadcast that people are going to miss because they're in the kitchen waiting for it to finish. So we will have to spend quite a lot of money to do the job well. As Stuart said, we've got the best in the business in the production side and the direction of these broadcasts. And I hope, if I'm allowed by the greybeards in the party to have my way on this, that they will be the most unusual party election broadcast that this country has ever seen. So I want your help in this. I want you to tell him that I've got to have exactly what I want. Because I want our election broadcast to refresh the parts that other politicians cannot reach. We will shortly be publishing another UKIP newspaper for distribution all over the country, and masses of new leaflets. We'll have a leaflet for March, a leaflet for April, a leaflet for May. There'll be plenty to do, plenty to distribute, plenty of ways in which we get our messages across. And the main message of our campaign is that UKIP is the real choice. There is no longer a spectrum of right, left, and centre in this country, as my charming assistant is about to demonstrate when she puts up the next slide, because that is the choice which the other parties are going to put before the British people. I remember when I used to go to Saturday morning cinema, my favourite item that came up was the Three Stooges. And that's the Three Stooges without the laughs, I'm afraid. But they are all the same, aren't they? They look the same, they talk the same, they've got the same message, broadly speaking, the same beliefs. They are the boys in the bubble. And they've never had a proper job, as Nigel keeps on saying, quite rightly. They've never had to make a profit, never had to pay a wage, never had to make ends meet. And their experience of life is so different from the overwhelming majority of people who've got a vote to use on the 22nd of May. They're like sticks of EU rock, aren't they? They've got Brussels going all the way through their bodies. Especially Mr. Clegg, of course, because he started life working for Sir Leon Britain, actually, Sir Leon Europe, as I used to call it, when he was a European commissioner. Then he became an MEP. He's temporarily a British member of Parliament, but I'm sure that what his ultimate goal is to go back where he came from to Brussels to be one of those grand European commissioners and possibly a future successor to Mr. Barroso or the sainted Mr. Herman Van Rompuy. Now, how different the choice that UKIP is putting forward before the British people. Not 3 identical suits, but somebody else.
It won't be terribly good, as you can see.
Now, the main difference between Nigel and all the others, of course, is that he is a recognisable human being. Not just a hologram through whom you could put your hand or an automaton. He is flesh and blood, with all the good points and the bad points that come from that. But I say that Nigel has all those redeeming defects that make a great political leader. To start with, he enjoys life. Nothing wrong with that, is there? He likes a drink. Nothing wrong with that either. And he's got a sense of humour. Just look at the magazine that he's reading. So I think it's game, set and match, and I'm so glad that Nick Clegg has offered himself up for the slaughter. And my goodness, isn't it telling that the other two haven't got the guts to put their heads on the block? Call themselves leaders, they're not leaders, they're followers, just followers of fashion and public opinion. We're the party with the real leader. So just going back to the 3 dark suits earlier on, I mean, the choice that they put before you is this. Do you want to be snubbed as voters? Or would you prefer to be ignored? Or would you prefer to be deceived? That's the choice that they're going to put before the British people, and we're going to make sure that there's another choice. Of course, Dave has got a great deal of form on Europe, and that we're going to expose in the course of this campaign to, well, Mrs. Merkel has done it already, I suppose, to show what a complete sham the whole of the Conservative policy on Europe is. It's a calculated fraud. It was Disraeli, over 100 years ago, 150 years ago, who said that the Conservative Party is an organised hypocrisy. Well, it's no longer organised. And it isn't actually an hypocrisy, it's worse than that, it's a fraud. You know, the first thing that Dave said after he became leader of the Conservative Party, astonishingly, as long ago as 2006, was that he wanted his MPs to stop banging on about Europe. And then, of course, we all remember the cast iron promise that he made before the Lisbon Treaty in 2008, 2009, knowing, of course, that cast iron is one of the more brittle metals that you could... and is very, very easily broken, as indeed the promise was as soon as he was in a position to implement it. William Hague, at the time of the last general election, committed himself to a policy of renegotiation in the EU, but he then said, of course, it won't be a priority for this Parliament, because he didn't want to pick a fight right at the very start of his period of office. And then we had Dave forcing his MPs to vote against a referendum in December 2011, and now the Grand Old Duke of York must be his political hero because he's marched up the top of the hill and down again the other side, and he's now committed the Conservative Party to the complete opposite of what he was saying just 2 years ago. So the jam tomorrow of 2017, as Mrs. Merkel made clear yesterday, is just a mirage, and that's what we're going to say throughout this election campaign, that UKIP is the party that not only talks straight, but we are the party that tells the truth. And we are actually also the party of the working man in this country now. None of the other parties represents the working man. Although Grant Shapps, the current leader of the chairman of the Conservative Party, says that he thinks the Conservative Party is the party that represents the workers today. Well, there are 6 people writing the next Conservative election manifesto. First of all, they're all men. At least that's what it says on the label. 5 of them are old Etonians. Nothing wrong with that, Stuart. But in a nod to social mobility, one of them is not from Eton, but from a minor public school called St Paul's. That's George Osborne, who is the token oik in the Eton Fives on this occasion. Well, I can tell you that we will be taking them on good and proper in these elections. And this is just the threshold of greatness for us, because in 2015 there's another big push when we come to elect our first members of Parliament to Westminster. Now we know, because several people have already referred to this, Stephen just a moment ago, that this election campaign is going to confront us with an avalanche of lies from the other side. The 3 million jobs myth, etc. I can say that there will be jobs lost, of course, as a result of our leaving the EU. The parasites of Brussels bureaucrats, the lobbyists, the quangocrats, the form fillers, the compliance officers, and all the other useless overlay of unproductive people who are living at our expense. And including all those who are on the EU equivalent of that TV programme Benefit Street. You know, families where they're intergenerational welfare scroungers, just to take one name at random, the Kinnocks. White Neil and White Glenys. European commissioners, MEPs, their son also now married to the Prime Minister of Denmark, all creaming it off from the taxpayer at our expense. Now, all this going on whilst Europe has one of the most massive economic crises of our lifetime. And what is the EU's answer to the economic crisis? Well, what do we had this year? We had proposals to ban cinnamon on Danish pastries as a health risk. That, of course, is only a precursor to banning the rest of the Danish pastry as well. And also a new proposal to harmonise the size of lavatory systems throughout Europe. This, I kid you not, this is because the EU wants to save water. Well, I don't think in this country that's a top priority for us at the moment. And for all the talk of how many jobs will be lost if we leave the EU, what I want to talk about is, what about the jobs that are being lost because we're in the EU? I well remember that I went down to the Ford factory in Eastleigh last February with Diane James because they just announced 800 compulsory redundancies at Ford's at Eastleigh because those jobs were being exported to Turkey because of EU regulatory costs and because the price of electricity in this country makes them uncompetitive. The EU's answer to that, of course, is to invite Turkey to join the EU so we get the jobs back inside the EU again. Along with another 80 million people in Turkey. And so it's these insane energy taxes and renewables targets, the closing of the cheap power stations in order to go back to the 18th century and rely on wind power to generate the electricity to keep the wheels of industry turning. These are the real tribulations of the modern British economy. These are the jobs in their hundreds of thousands and millions which are already being lost and which we could revive if we had the power, the legislative power, to make these policy decisions for ourselves. So, we don't need to look in the crystal of what life's going to be like outside the EU. Just read the book of what it's like right now. We will concentrate during the course of the next few months also inevitably on immigration as the top concern of everybody, regardless of which party they have voted for in the past. It affects everything: jobs, wages, housing, development, transport, you name it. It's all affected by the colossal numbers which are lined up to come into this country, already England at any rate, the most densely populated country in Europe. And things are getting worse. We saw this week the House of Commons Library forecast that between 2011 and 2021, a further 1.4 million immigrants will come to this country. That's 629,000 households, twice the size of a city like Leeds. So where's the land coming from to put all these cities on? It's coming to a place near you quite soon, I can tell you. So, and this, of course, hasn't happened by accident, because Andrew Nether, an advisor to Tony Blair, let the cat out of the bag just a few years ago, where he said it was the deliberate policy of ministers from late 2000 until at least February 2008 to open up the UK to mass migration, to rub the right's nose in diversity and render their arguments out of date. So in that way, Labour has betrayed its own supporters, for which it was historically founded to defend, the working classes of this country, who are the main sufferers of this massive immigration. Now, I've already gone over my time, so I've got, unfortunately, to cut out a good part of what I might otherwise have told you. But it's going to be a hard-fought campaign and a bruising campaign. And I'm intending that we're the one who lands the bruises on the other people that we are fighting in the course of this election campaign. Because we've got a tremendous battle ahead of us, and we've got to come up to the mark. It's a historic opportunity for UKIP. There'll never be an opportunity like this again. We've got to make the most of it. Nothing that I've described will change under the Lib Lab Com, because they are not the real rulers of Britain. We know who the real rulers of Britain are, don't we, Lisa? No, not that one. That's one I was going to had to cut out, sadly. But these are the real rulers of Britain, the anonymous autocrats whom we didn't elect and we can't dismiss. Now, as Nigel said earlier on, our task is not to get mad, but to get even. So gird up your loins, and if you can't manage that, gird up somebody else's loins. Let's go out and galvanise the frustrations of the British people into a spontaneous uprising of support for our party to reclaim our country and our national self-respect. Kick them in the ballots where it hurts on the 22nd of May. And so it's because we love Britain that we'll be voting UKIP.